From samurai upstarts to emperors in exile, the Kamakura period was a battlefield of ambition. The rise of the Minamoto, the cunning dominance of the Hojo, and the thunder of Mongol fleets all encompassed one period, the Kamakura period. The Kamakura period began in 1185 with the end of the de facto rule of the Taira clan, and its replacement as the preeminent clan with the Saiwa Genji branch of the Minamoto, following the Genpei War. The Taira emerged as the most powerful clan under Taira no Kiyomori, after the Heiji rebellion in 1160. At first, Kiyomori played a secondary role in governance, behind the retired emperor Go Shirakawa. However, over time his power grew. In 1167 he became Daijo Dajin, the Chancellor of the realm, one of the highest ranks in Heian Japan. Yet his rise was still unfinished. He was still junior to the retired emperor, a situation that lasted until 1179, when Kiyomori staged a coup d'etat that reduced the power of the retired emperor. In 1180 the Taira's power further strengthened when Kiyomori's grandson became emperor. This echoed a strategy that the Fujiwara clan used to maintain their influence for a large period of Heian Japan, marrying into the imperial family. For the Taira this was done through Kiyomori's daughter, Tokuko, in 1171. The Heiji rebellion left the Minamoto reeling. Their leader, Minamoto no Yoshitomo, died, leaving behind his young sons, among them Minamoto no Yoritomo. Finding refuge with the Hojo, Yoritomo later married Hojo Masako, binding the two clans together. In 1180 he rose up against Taira rule in the Genpei War, though it was not he who triggered the conflict. This role was fulfilled by Go Shirakawa's son, Prince Mochihito. Due to Kiyomori's grandson Antoku taking the throne instead of him, the prince called for an uprising against the Taira in May 1180. However, his campaign was short-lived. He and his ally Minamoto no Yorimasa were killed soon after in the events surrounding the Battle of Uji in June 1180. Yoritomo rose up after he received the call for an uprising, seeing it as a perfect moment to restore his clan's power. He gained followers for this conflict by appealing not to some semblance of justice or loyalty to the imperial family, but by promising security for the warriors' lands. Seeking to defend his clan's status, Kiyomori headed back to Kyoto from where he had been staying at Fukuhara-kyo. The Taira then won a string of victories in the Kansai region, at Omi and Nara, before turning to Chubu, where they crushed the Mino Genji and triumphed again at the Battle of Tsunomatagawa in Owari. However, between the victories in Mino and Owari, Kiyomori died of illness. The man who elevated the Taira to their position of dominance died in the middle of the war that would determine whether it would continue. Between 1181 and 1183 the war settled into a stalemate. This deadlock was broken by Yoritomo's cousin, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, who achieved major victories over the Taira at the battles of Kurikara Pass and Shinohara, subsequently entering Kyoto. After the loss of the capital, the Taira, taking Emperor Antoku with them, took flight. While this was a significant victory for the Minamoto, it also precipitated internal conflict. Yoshinaka challenged Yoritomo's leadership, causing Yoritomo to send his brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, to deal with him, which he did so successfully at the Battle of Awazu at the start of 1184. After rebuilding following their loss of Kyoto, the Taira suffered a heavy defeat at the Battle of Ichi-no-Tani at the hands of Yoshitsune. Minamoto's victory here again put the Taira on the back foot. Yoshitsune commanded further victories at the battles of Yashima and Dan-no-Ura at the beginning of 1185. Dan-no-Ura brought a decisive end to the conflict. The events around the battle saw the deaths of the Taira leadership, including Emperor Antoku and Taira no Kiyomori's successor Munemori. With the Taira destroyed, the Minamoto were now the strongest clan in the nation. Yoritomo's power grew throughout the Genpei War. Initially labelled as a rebel, by 1183 his sphere of influence in eastern Japan was recognised when the retired emperor tasked him with carrying out an edict. His power only continued to rise. After the war he received permission to set up a mandokoro, and to appoint Shugo and Jito. In 1189 his influence spread northwards, conquering the Tohoku region from the northern Fujiwara. The clan was brought to heel after Minamoto dominance in the Battle of Oshu, following which the Fujiwara leader was hunted down and killed. After Go Shirakawa's death in 1192, Yoritomo was appointed shogun, formally inaugurating his warrior government. The new emperor, Go-Toba, saw imperial power decline over his lifetime. Though this was a gradual shift, Go-Toba continued the practice of ruling as a retired emperor after abdicating in 1198, and the imperial family remained an important power player until the Jokyu War, which will be discussed later. However, Yoritomo did not reap the rewards of his clan's incredible comeback for long. In 1199, at the age of 51, he passed away. His death paved the way for Hojo clan dominance over Japan, up until the end of the shogunate in 1333. As was mentioned earlier, Yoritomo was married to Hojo Masako, binding the two clans together. When Yoritomo's successor, his son Minamoto no Yori, ruled as shogun, the two dominant clans were the Hojo and the Hiki. Both clans had family ties to the shogun, the Hojo through his mother, and the head of the Hiki was the shogun's father-in-law. In 1203, the leader of the Hiki was killed by the Hojo, and Yori was ousted in favour of his younger brother Sanetomo, who was still a child, and therefore after these events the Hojo began to dominate Japanese affairs. Despite the Hojo's influence, their leader Hojo Tokimasa found himself in a situation where his position became untenable. He plotted to kill the new shogun, but when this failed he stepped back from national politics in 1205, to be succeeded by his son, Hojo Yoshitoki, as regent to the shogun, or shiken. The Hojo under Yoshitoki continued to solidify their control, and wipe out potential rivals, such as the Wada clan in 1213. The final years of Yoshitoki's regency were turbulent, seeing two major incidents shake the foundations of the Bakufu, yet the shogunate strengthened after both. The first major incident took place in 1219, the assassination of the shogun Sanetomo. Sanetomo's death was not at the hands of the Hojo clan, as it may have been some 14 years earlier, but from a fellow Minamoto. Minamoto no Yori's son, Kugyo, killed him at the Tsurugaoka Hachimangu shrine in Kamakura, and for this deed Kugyo lost his life. The Hojo took advantage of the assassination to further increase their power, assuming responsibilities for the issuance of edicts from the Mandokoro. The second incident, or rather crisis, was a direct challenge to Hojo rule from the imperial court. After Sanetomo's assassination, Go-Toba refused to name Sanetomo's distant relative, Fujiwara no Yoritsune, as the next shogun, despite his candidacy being backed by the Hojo. Yoritsune had to wait several years before finally being confirmed as the fourth shogun in 1226. This challenge paled in comparison to what happened in 1221, when Go-Toba launched an armed conflict against the Bakufu, known as the Jokyu War. Unfortunately for the retired emperor, the Hojo forces swiftly defeated him, entering Kyoto around a month after first gathering their troops. Go-Toba was then banished to Oki, and his descendants were barred from holding the title of emperor, meaning that his young grandson, Chukyo, was replaced by Go Horikawa. The Hojo's victory in this conflict solidified their position as rulers of the nation. Hojo Yoshitoki died in 1224. His successor Yasutoki engaged in some notable reforms. He created the post of Rensho, the co-regent, and formed the Hyojoshu, a council to help run the Bakufu. Another notable reform was in 1232, with the implementation of the Gosebai Shikimoku, which was an unprecedented development, because it was the first code of conduct to exist for the warriors. After Yasutoki's death in 1242, the Hojo faced a challenge to their authority from Fujiwara no Yoritsune. The Hojo regent Tsunetoki and the shogun did not enjoy good relations with each other, and after Yoritsune was removed in 1244, he fomented resistance against Hojo rule, causing him to be kicked out of Kamakura. Another source of opposition came from the Miura, who were suppressed in 1247. By dealing with the Miura, one of the most powerful clans, the Hojo's dominance was further secured. After the deposition of the 5th shogun, Fujiwara no Yoritsugu in 1252, Prince Munetaka was appointed to the post. From then until the end of the shogunate, all shoguns came from the imperial family, meaning that the Hojo held strong influence in both Kyoto and Kamakura. We now move on to the regency of Hojo Tokimune. Ruling between 1268 and 1284, his tenure witnessed the attempted conquest of Japan by the Mongol Empire. The Mongols over the past century have been a rapidly expanding power, forging an empire that covered vast swathes of the Eurasian continent, stretching from Beijing to Baghdad. One land yet unconquered was Japan. Mongol approaches to Japan began in 1268, when a letter arrived that asserted Mongol strength and sought to establish ties. This was the first of a series of attempts to admit Japan to the empire diplomatically, rather than by conquest. However, this approach did not succeed, prompting the Mongols and their vassal state Koryo to ready themselves for an invasion in 1273. In late 1274, nearly 30,000 Mongols and their vassals departed Masan in southern Korea, and sailed towards the Japanese archipelago, aboard the technologically advanced Chinese-style ships. On their approach to Kyushu, they quickly seized Tsushima before moving on to the smaller island of Iki, which held for long enough so that a warning of the impending attack could be sent to Kyushu. The invasion force then descended on Hakata Bay, the primary port connecting Japan to the Asian mainland, reaching the bay mere days after defeating the soldiers on Iki. At Hakata, they forced the several thousand Japanese defenders off of the beach. However, the next day the Mongol fleet was nowhere to be seen, supposedly pounded by bad weather. Some stragglers were able to return to Korea, and this invasion was not the end of the Mongol attempts to pursue the island nation's subjugation. Again they attempted to acquire Japan diplomatically, though like the last time this strategy failed. The Japanese killed Mongol envoys in 1275 and 1279. Therefore, another invasion was launched in 1281. Much had changed in the intervening years. The Japanese had used the period of peace to strengthen their defences. A 20-kilometre long wall was built around Hakata Bay. On the Mongol side, they defeated the Southern Song in 1279, allowing for a greater concentration of manpower and resources on the Japanese campaign. The Mongols split their invasion force into two, the Eastern and Southern Route armies. Korea served as the staging point for the smaller Eastern Route army, while the larger Southern Route army was based in China, made up of 100,000 troops alone. They were to meet each other near Iki before advancing on the Japanese mainland. However, this plan unravelled. The Korean army, eager to embark on the mission, took Tsushima and Iki before moving on to Hakata Bay, despite not having met up with the Southern Route army. In contrast to the 1274 invasion, the Japanese held strong at Hakata, aided by their defensive preparations. The Mongols even had to pull back to Iki. When the Southern Route army eventually arrived, it attempted landings further west in Imari, capturing Takashima, but failing to push inland. In the end, the second Mongol invasion met the same fate as the first, as the fleet was battered by a typhoon. The victory against the Mongols ended the most immediate threat to the shogunate, but it also created new challenges. The shogunate maintained defences for years to come, which was an expensive undertaking for its vassals. Furthermore, it struggled to reward them as it had in previous wars such as the Genpei and Jokyu wars, when territory could be seized from defeated opponents. Because the conflict with the Mongols was defensive, no land was gained. Therefore resentment grew against the shogunate, who rewarded those in Kyushu by acknowledging their landholdings, even though they were not owned by the shogunate. Other methods included giving back landholdings if they had been sold in the last 20 years, if it was because of financial hardship. Tokimune died in 1284 and he was replaced by the young Hojo Sadatoki. One of the most influential people who was not a member of the Hojo clan was Adachi Yasumori. Yasumori was father-in-law to Tokimune and pulled the strings at the beginning of Sadatoki's tenure. Taira no Yoritsuna led the resistance against Adachi dominance, and in 1285 he ambushed Adachi Yasumori, killing the powerful warrior in what is known as the Shimotsuki incident. Yoritsuna was now the man who pulled the strings, though not for long. Sadatoki, now an adult, wrestled back power and killed Yoritsuna in 1293 in the Heizenmon rebellion. Over the following decades, the Hojo regent's grip on power faced renewed challenges from the imperial court. Around a century after the Jokyu War, Emperor Go-Daigo, who was born during the turmoil at the start of Sadatoki's tenure, sought to restore imperial rule. However, the unfolding of these events will be explored in the next video, the Kenmu Restoration.